Good afternoon. I'm your host, Brian Buckmire, here at the Law&Crime Trial Network. Currently, we do not have any live trials, but we got quite the show for you. We're going to start off with the Kellen Winslow Jr. case. Now, if you recall, Kellen Winslow, I apologize, Kellen Winslow II, this is a retrial case. Very interesting how this is all piecing together. If you recall, at the beginning of this trial, back in the first one, there were five, count them, 5 Jane Does. Now, he was convicted of one, that being Jane Doe number 3, but there were some arguments as to whether or not all Jane Does should be presented. Motions were filed, arguments were made, and it appears that the charges as it pertains to Jane Doe number 5 will not be represented in this second trial. So, just to recap, Kellen Winslow II is only going to be prosecuted for Jane Doe number 1, Jane Doe number 2, and Jane Doe number 4. Now, if you recall, Jane Doe number 5 was the individual who's in the jacuzzi. Now, he was found guilty as to the incidents that occurred inside of the gym. Remember, she was saying he's walking around, he's got an erect penis, he's wearing very tight pants, he's asking her very provocative questions. That, guilty. But if you recall, there was then an incident that happened in the jacuzzi where there were a lot of bubbles moving around, and on the stand, she said herself she couldn't make out what was going on. After arguments made by the defense, we find that those charges are not going to be represented. Whether it's a win or a loss, we're not sure, because a lot of us here at the network are discussing this. Those are some of the more vague and kind of out there charges that weren't that strong. But maybe with just the 3 charges that are left, or the 3 complainants that are left, it might be a stronger case for the prosecution, or maybe a stronger case for the defense. I'm not sure. But we want to recap with some of the Jane Does that we saw during this program. But first, I want to bring in our great guest, Katie Smith. How you doing today, Katie?
Hey, Brian.
Great. So, interesting case. It's shaking down where there was once 5. There are now 3. 1 only because he was found guilty of 1, but it seems that there's some pretty good motion papers that kept out one of the Jane Does. Is this the beginning of a victory for the defense, or maybe just the calm before the storm for the defense?
I sometimes think, to your point earlier, that when you weed out the weaker ones, oftentimes you will have a stronger case. I mean, then there is less likelihood that there will be a compromise with the verdict, with the jury. But I think sometimes that, that is the weaker one that wound up getting knocked out anyway. So I think we have some very strong ones that are still going to proceed to the jury.
It's going to be an interesting approach as to how this comes down. Remember, in the first trial, they were talking about, hey, they're after his money. They know who he is. Some of these allegations are a little wishy-washy. It's going to be interesting to see how they present their defense now that all of the Jane Does that are present are pretty streamlined. Some of them are pretty credible. It's kind of a surprise that some of them he wasn't found guilty of. But it's going to be interesting to see. I first want to take a look at the testimony from Jane Doe number 1, who will be returning to testify in the second trial. Let's take a look. Very intriguing testimony. Now, just to recall, or to recap, Jane Doe number 1 is the 54-year-old. Now, the incident happened allegedly on March 17th of 2018, but she reported about 4 days later. The charges that Kellen Winslow II are facing as it applies to Jane Doe number 1 are 3 charges. 1 is kidnap of a specific felony crime. The jury was deadlocked in the first trial. The second was forcible rape, deadlock again. And the third was forcible oral copulation, which again, they were deadlocked. Katie, I want you to jump in and comment on this one. There were some interesting things that were found here. I believe that in this Jane Doe, Kellen Winslow's DNA was found in her pants. Now, I think the argument here the defense is going with, and then they kind of deadlocked on, was this is consensual.
Right.
Does he have some type of persuasion towards older women? Yeah, and that's perfectly fine. Does he have a persuasion towards hitchhikers or transient women? Maybe not so perfectly fine, a little bit weird, but to each is his own, right? But rape is definitely a crime, and that's where we draw the line. And I think the jury had a problem with, is this something that we maybe want to say is like bad and like maybe he shouldn't do, or is it something that's criminal? I think that's what they were kind of hung up on. What would you think?
I do. I think, and again, we weren't there, but my sense is that the fact that she was transient, they maybe believed that she was either consenting or making some sort of barter. She was getting a ride somewhere. I think also it's problematic that she didn't identify him right away. I remember there was a lineup soon after she reported the incident around the time of the preliminary hearing, and she actually never identified him. So I think that that's problematic as well.
Yeah, even interesting, and I know I said this in the first trial, where I'm like, at least for her, I think there should have been some sort of ID witness to talk about this. I think she actually had, like you said, had problems identifying him in a 6-person lineup. So it's just like 6 people stand there, all of a similar age, height, obviously same gender, and couldn't identify him. And then in a preliminary hearing, instead of identifying him, which is hilarious, because if you've ever been in a courtroom, it is painfully obvious who the defendant is. I mean, sometimes I play around with it in court. I don't wear a jacket, and if my client is African American, I'd be like, let's see who they pick. Hasn't happened yet. I'm waiting for it. But in this case, it actually happens, and she picks the lawyer.
I remember that.
It's like, and here, you see it here. Now, I will admit, I can see some similarities.
Oh, come on.
But I don't see enough that I'm like, I don't know. I think it's clear. But I think there needs to be some testimony about identification that maybe would help the defense. I don't know. What do you think?
I mean, first of all, I don't think that they are similar enough in any way, shape, or form to have it confused. But I mean, it's weird that the ID should matter so much when there's really no dispute that his DNA was in her underwear, right? So ID is important, I think, almost to establish credibility in this sense. But it's not that important, and we know he was there. They definitely had sexual contact. And I think that maybe one of the weird things that the jury is wrangling with was, why would he want to have sexual contact with this woman? You know, is this a paraphilia? Is this something that's a fetish, or did he rape this woman? And I think it's really hard for people to wrap their minds around.
Yeah, well, Summer Foster, Jane Doe #1's daughter, actually testified in this trial as well to, I assume, help corroborate her mother's testimony. Of course, she'd be considered an interested witness, but let's take a listen to what she had to say. Now, very interesting that Jane Doe, of course, that testimony was the daughter, but prior to that, Jane Doe #1, she actually started a GoFundMe page in connection with this case. And if you're not familiar with GoFundMe, it's a page where you're asking people to give you money for any kind of, I mean, sometimes it's supposed to be like a charity or a good cause, but you can ask for anything. I mean, if you guys want to start a GoFundMe for my law school loans, like, go for it, but you can really do it for almost anything. And in connection with this case, she set up that GoFundMe page, and the lawyers actually had something to say about that when they were asking questions of Jane Doe #1's daughter. Let's take a listen to what they had to say. So in one aspect, that is a great daughter doing something for her mother to help with the therapy and relocation. I think many people who don't have that kind of technological expertise might look to someone. I don't want to say it's an older, younger thing, but that's common how it happens. I often get calls from my mom saying, "Hey, Brian, can you fix this for me?" And I'm like, "Mom, all right, got it." But it was used as a tool for the defense to say she's looking for money. Now, if you recall, Katie, she actually went on TV and not only said that she had the GoFundMe page, but also promoted it to say, "Hey, send money our way." Does this not just feed into the narrative that the defense is saying, "Hey, this is a money grab and nothing else"?
It does, and it's unfortunate because there are so many reasons why these victims would really need some financial compensation, because I'm sure this is a great strain on them emotionally, financially. But it looks really bad. It looks bad regardless whether the daughter made it for the mom, at the behest of the mom, whatever. They're trying to get monetary gain behind this, and it doesn't look great.
Yeah. And it's interesting because at least where I practice here in New York City, all the prosecutors' offices typically have a bit of money put to the side for victims. And even as a public defender, I think that's great. Like, there are so many psychological and physical things that come out of pocket that these victims need. But I think when it's done this way, it just adds more fuel for the fire, and especially this type of case. Do you think we can see it come up again in the second trial?
Yes, I think it's a great argument to make. And here's the thing, a lot of times after the criminal trial, the victims will then come civilly after the defendants, which is, by the way, is still an available remedy here. It's just the fact that they did it contemporaneously and sort of in a sideways kind of way with this GoFundMe is not great.
And also the promotion on TV, that's peculiar.
Yeah.
But we're going to continue with the Kellen Winslow II case. After this break, we're going to look at the testimony of Jane Doe #2 as we work our way through the upcoming trial. See you then.